Are robots the same as people? What defines a person? Is it flesh and blood, a soul, or the ability to have independent thought? Today, we're going to be getting into what it means to be a person as we look at the Netflix film, The Electric State. It's going to be a lot of fun. I am Joshua Noel, one of your hosts, here with the one and only Andy Walsh. How's it going?
Doing all right, thanks. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Yeah, and, per usual, we like to start with what we've been geeking out on, but I forgot what kind of episode this was, and I'm going to switch it up because we're going to do this as a primarily political episode. Since this film did have a lot to do with politics, we thought it would be fun to kind of jump on it, review it from that angle. But first things first, we all like to, in these kind of episodes, identify... we start off identifying a bad actor in politics, and near the end, we'll identify someone we think is a good actor in politics. So real, Bible, fiction... doesn't matter. Someone who you think is a bad actor in politics. I wanted to go first, but I can't remember exactly who I was going to say. You know, I got one. Dr. Nefarious. In the newest Ratchet and Clank game, there's a different multiverse where there is Emperor Nefarious, and he's in charge of everything. And in usual Ratchet and Clank fashion, not only is he, using his power for selfish means and all that megalomaniac kind of stuff that we definitely would never see in the real world, they do it in exaggerated, silly ways where, people are just like, what's the code? By law, the code to every club is nefarious is great. Just silly stuff. And I don't know. I love the Ratchet and Clank games. And I love that kind of satire, making fun of that kind of political leader. And it's something I need right now in our current times. So, Andy, who is a bad actor in politics that you can identify from fiction or other way? Please.
Sure. So, given that there is a lot going on right now, it feels necessary to make some comment thereon. But I'm going to cheat a little bit because I think when we're talking about the real world, labeling people as villains and good guys and so forth is a little bit reductive. And we're talking about politics. It makes more sense to talk about policies and bad actions rather than bad actors. So, one of my chief concerns at the moment is that we have stopped or at least, paused aid to other parts of the world that provides medicine to people who are infected with HIV and tuberculosis, among a variety of other things. But those are two big ones that have been in my mind a lot. Just because of the scale of the problem, right? I think we have some awareness of the scale of the HIV pandemic, but I think a lot of times we forget that tuberculosis is one of the biggest cause of death in terms of infections worldwide. It is still a serious problem. It is not just a thing that killed people in olden days when they wore corsets and coughed blood up into handkerchiefs. It is still a thing that is going on right now. And, we've stopped providing funds to provide medicine for people for these infections. And even if we ultimately decide, well, that the way we were doing it was fraudulent or corrupt or wasteful and we need a more efficient way to do it, even just pausing these things for a while, right, that is absolutely a textbook recipe for breeding drug-resistant strains of these things. And in particular, drug-resistant tuberculosis is not something that you want to mess around with. And so, I hate to be such a real world downer right out of the gate, but those are the kinds of things that are on my mind at the moment.
Yeah. The last one of these I did, I think we did Dead Space, was primarily political back in January, and I do think I just named Trump as a bad actor, and I still think that that's just accurate, and that administration is a lot to do with the stuff you were talking about, as well as lots of other evil things in the world, and very similar to the Emperor Nefarious cartoonish stuff, because it's stuff like we're going to put tariffs on a country that's an island that only has penguins. Okay, it's just cartoonish sometimes, or you're like, this is the real world apparently, and sometimes it's just as funny as otherwise. It's like that year that South Park wanted to stop because they were like, we can't make satire that's more ridiculous than the real world anymore.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes
it's
just reading the news is the joke.
yeah. Read the news, pretend like it's not real, and it would be really funny. Um, but anyway, we do want to ask our audience to please rate and review our show on Podchaser, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. I know it seems like we're already in the meat of the episode, but we're not. We just like talking, and as soon as we have a reason to, we start. But also want to thank one of our supporters, Jeannie Mattingly. You are amazing. And remember, guys, you too can sponsor our show on Apple Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spot. That's not right. You too can sponsor our show on Patreon, Captivate, or Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is right. Okay, anyway. Again, this is part of our primarily political series. You can hear the entire series using the link that's going to be down in the description. I will try to use words better from here on out, and in those other episodes too. All right. That was way louder than anticipated. We are gunning into today's episode. How did we hear about the movie, and what do you think the general reception of it is so far? We mentioned this on another episode, the reception part. But how did you first hear about the film?
Yeah, as a fan of the MCU and especially the Avengers movies and the Captain America movies that the Russo brothers have directed and Marcus and McFeely have co-written, I, kind of had them on my radar in general. So there are other projects like The Gray Man and Citadel and so forth, right? I've had varying levels of curiosity about all of them. And so, yeah, I think I was aware of this, when it was announced or shortly thereafter. So it's kind of been on my radar for a while and on the back burner of, oh, yeah, I hope that turns out well. That should be, it sounds interesting. It sounds ambitious and it should be cool to check out.
Yeah, yeah. I somehow this one sneaked up on me. I'm not sure how, because I followed the Russo brothers for a long time. They were also behind like Community, which I love that show. And then the Avengers stuff was great. Captain America stuff was great. But I remember I was literally just on the couch with my wife, and we opened up Netflix, and we were going down to like the show we were watching, and I was like, "Hold up, go up one. That kind of looks like Chris Pratt." Like, what is this random robot movie that has Chris Pratt in it? Like, I literally had no idea that this thing existed until a couple days after it came out, and it was like on the top 10 of Netflix or something, and I was like, let's check this out. And it was like Chris Pratt. You got the girl from Stranger Things, the Russo brothers behind it, and a bunch of other like big name actors. I found like throughout this, and I was like, why did I not know that this was getting made?
It it remains a bit of a mystery how these streaming services make money on these huge projects that, I mean, this, as I understand it, this is one of the more expensive movies that have been made, recently and thus kind of ever if you don't adjust for inflation. Um, between the cost of the practical effects and the cost of all the famous people that are involved, and
Mm.
yet and that's it's hardly alone in that. I mean, Apple does that, Amazon does that. They put a lot of money into these movies that are just for their platforms, but they don't get advertised in any of the ways that movies normally get advertised. You don't see trailers for them when you go to the movie theater for other things. You don't see TV commercials for them when you're watching, unless you're watching that service sometimes. But yeah, it seems like they just sort of arrive on your streaming platform, and they're not even necessarily at the top of the list. Like, come on, guys, you put a lot of money into this movie. Presumably, you wanted people to see it. Like, tell people that it exists. It makes me think of Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to remember that the doomsday weapon. The important thing is to tell people you have it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that thing that TJ complains about with Treasure Planet, where like Treasure Planet costs so much for Disney to make that they kind of under advertised it and intentionally released Lilo and Stitch the same year so that people would just kind of forget about it. And it's like, it's funny because it's TJ's favorite Disney movie, and it just didn't get big till much later, and it's still not as big as I probably could have been because I like it costs so much. And like this is like the opposite though, where like they're doing the thing that cost a lot, and they're not necessarily hiding it because they're just going to turn around and make another thing that cost a lot, and it's like I don't understand the goal here.
Right, and it's the disconnect between how they make their money and the production of these things and whether or not people watch them just seems very strange. And so, yeah, they seem fairly indifferent to whether anybody actually watches it. As long as people are continuing to subscribe and watch something, like it's a win. And so, yeah, we'll throw money at the next thing. And if people watch it, great. If people don't watch it, that's fine. As long as there's nets of like subscribers.
Yeah, it's so wild. I'm like, I just what? And this one was it felt like it had a huge budget. And the weird thing is, like, I didn't find out till after I watched it, but most of the places I see people talking about it, people are just talking about how they just don't like this movie. And I
Yeah,
don't understand.
to come out right, to be clear, I'm not saying that this is a great movie. This is an instant classic, 10 out of 10 or anything like that. But to me, it was a solid like 3-star kind of movie that I don't understand why it's getting this kind of universal kicking.
Yeah, like there are many things I would watch this over many other things, if that makes sense. Like it's not my favorite. It's not even my favorite Netflix. And I have unpopular Netflix opinions because I don't like Stranger Things. So I would much rather watch this than Stranger Things. But like, if you compare it to like Wednesday or a series of unfortunate events, or I'm trying to think, there's been a few Netflix, even their One Piece. I definitely like those other things more.
Hmm.
But this movie, like as far as like if I'm just gonna sit down and watch a fun like I guess maybe that's the problem. It's not just a good sit down fun movie because it's also asking you to think, but it doesn't dig too deep into any of that stuff either.
Hmm.
So it sits in a weird place where it's not like a fun. It's also not just. It's not just a fun action movie, and it's also not just a philosophical film either. Like it's not really either.
Right. It Yeah, it. I mean, and it's a pretty obvious comparison, but it feels a lot to me like Steven Spielberg's AI. It kind of occupies that same place of it's bringing up a lot of issues, but doesn't necessarily get into real deep. It's not a 2001 kind of sci-fi, hard sci-fi. It's not Arrival. It's not really doesn't have a whole lot to say, but it has a lot of questions and a lot of ideas. But yeah, because of that, it's not also just sort of a fun romp. And AI had that same kind of problem of it's a little bit too heavy and emotional to be a fun family Steven Spielberg movie, but it also lives in the shadow of it should have been a Stanley Kubrick project and it should have been 2001, and it isn't.
Yeah, yeah. I Yeah, I get all that. And I mean, I like when a film asks me big questions, even if it doesn't say a lot about the thing. I wish they would have sat and stuff a little bit longer and
Hmm.
kind of dwelt on some of the complexities. But it kind of rather was like, and what if robots are the same as people? Moving on. And it's like, oh, hold up, let's sit on the question for just a second. Like you don't have
Hmm.
to answer it for me, but let's explore that a little bit more. And I don't know, they kind of set it up like they could do a sequel, and maybe they'll do more of that in the sequel. I don't know. I'm also not sure if they'll actually make a sequel because it cost a ton and really got kicked around for some reason.
Yeah, but maybe Netflix doesn't care.
That's true. It does seem
Right?
like Netflix might not care at all.
They could make prequels. They could make sequels. There's a
All they-
lot of there's a lot of potential in or there's a lot of story timeline that's already kind of hinted at that you could
yeah.
explore if you wanted to.
Man, I wish I could remember what it was, but like there was a point like a couple of years ago. My wife and I were like on the couch watching TV, and just listen. I'll be honest. Sometimes I just like really stereotypical rom coms. I think they're hilarious. And we found one, and we were like, "This is great." And then we found out that it had like 4 sequels, a prequel, and a TV show, and it's all like Netflix original. I'm like, well, where did any of this come from? It's just like all stereotypical rom com, and you're like, what?
Yeah, the Lacey Chabert Industrial Complex on Netflix.
Yeah,
There's a whole other corner of Netflix which is just Christmas movies and rom-coms that they make for pennies, and can churn out probably half a dozen a year with the same cast and probably the same directors and writers and so forth. But scrolling through the Netflix menu, it's not as obvious who those folks are. But yeah,
yeah,
you could scroll through and you hit a row. And it's like Lacey Chabert, Lacey Chabert, Lacey Chabert. Well, I'm glad to see that she is getting work.
yeah. And it's like, it's so funny though because A lot of times you could just go along not knowing any of that stuff existed on the platform at all.
Right? Yeah. If yeah, other people are logging in and have a completely different Netflix experience. I have no idea that's there.
Yeah, oh, it's so funny. But so talking about Electric State, how it got kicked around, and how we haven't given our review yet, but I think it's clear that neither of us think it deserves the kicking it got. Um, Andy, would you mind just kind of summarizing the plot the best that you can for this film?
Sure. And are we going full spoilers here, or do we want to try
Oh
to keep
yeah,
some things
yeah,
back? All right.
all the
Okay.
spoilers. It's their
Okay.
fault they haven't seen it yet.
Okay. It's right there on your Netflix, waiting for you. So the premise is that we are in an alternate 1990s United States, where we just built a lot of humanoid robots to do all the things that we didn't want to do, or all the things that we thought a humanoid robot could do. And then those humanoid robots started to realize that they didn't like doing these menial jobs either, and tried to unionize and tried to organize. And eventually there was a violent uprising, which led to all of these robots being cordoned off, sequestered, quarantined. Uh, choose your verb. In I guess the southwestern United States. I don't know that we ever see a map to get the exact extent, but there's some large land area in the western United States that we've just kind of given over to the robots and built a big wall. And now the two groups, the humans and the robots, are kept separate. And that's just the setup. That is the world as it stands
Yeah,
when the movie starts. And now the humans sort of live in their separate world, where the big thing now is a sort of VR experience. You put on a goofy looking helmet, and you can simultaneously like watch TV or live in your sort of virtual reality fantasy, while also kind of piloting a non-sentient, non-autonomous robot, body to do your job, right? So you kind of, with half of your brain, you send your robot to work to do whatever your job is, while you sit at home on the couch and also, sit on a beach, a virtual reality beach. And that's kind of the world that most people are in. Is living in living in their own separate virtual realities, and work gets done by piloted robots. And in that world, we meet Millie Bobby Brown, who is a student, and is the one rebellious student who wants to just read books and not learn through the virtual reality helmet. And we discover that her parents and her brother died in a car accident, and so she's been kind of bouncing around the foster system. And turns out that, lo and behold, her brother actually isn't dead. He comes to her in the body of the robot that you see there with the yellow head and the big smile. He has somehow gotten his consciousness into this robot, and has come to her so that she can come and rescue his actual physical body and his physical self. And they go off on so that's a very typical, start of a heroic journey, right? Go off on a quest, and along the way, so she finds out that her brother is being kept in this robot zone. He's somehow in that part of the world, and so she has to find a way into through the wall and navigating to where he is, and that leads her to Chris Pratt, who is a guy who smuggles things, runs contraband out of the robot zone. He goes into the robot zone, gathers up things that for whatever reason are there and not being used, and he brings them back and sells them in a sort of black market situation. And so then they they go into the robot zone, and now they have to make friends with other robots because they're traveling with a robot, and he has a robot buddy that helps him. Herman is the big robot there with the sort of half sphere head, and the wry grin. So that's Chris Pratt's friend. So that because they are a coalition of two robots and two people, or at least two humans maybe, and two robots or one robot presenting human. I'm not even sure. The words are getting tricky here. Um, but yeah, so that they kind of raise a lot of questions among both the humans who are concerned about what they're doing and the robots who don't know if they want to help them or hurt them. And they eventually discover her brother, as you might expect. As you might not expect, her brother is being held by the company that runs the VR because, for whatever reason, the only way that this whole VR network works is that all the traffic has to go through his brain. He has some sort of genetic anomaly or something that's not fully explained that makes him absolutely essential to this process. And if he were to be disconnected, this whole virtual reality shtick would fall apart. And so therein, lies the conflict of the final act of the movie is, do we, we have to rescue the brother from this, but what happens if we take him out of here? And um, will the robots help? Will the robots sit on the sidelines? Will the robots oppose this effort? What are the humans going to do? There's the people who are in charge of this company. They obviously want to keep their cash cow going. There's the mercenary that they've hired. Where do his loyalties lie, and so forth. So it's all those kinds of questions all come to a head in a third act that involves, as you might expect, a lot of robot mayhem, a lot of moral dilemmas, and a lot of big emotions. All set to a 90s soundtrack, because again, we are in alternate 1990s America, and so Millie Bobby Brown is learning about what the 90s were like for the very first time from Chris Pratt in real life because she wasn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on here. Also, like, so I mentioned some of the big actors. You had Ki Ho Kwan, or am I saying that name right?
As close as
Yeah.
I don't know how to correct you there.
Well, good. He's here. We mentioned Chris Pratt. We mentioned the girl from Stranger Things. Um, there was another guy who.
Herman is voiced by Anthony Mackie.
Yeah. Marshall Bradbury is I don't know how to say his name either, but that actor is also in a lot of different things. The cast was crazy. The film was I thought it was really good, personally, but the what's the big robot's name there? I can never remember. Herman. One thing I really enjoyed, like I thought was like probably the funniest joke from the movie, is so he gets into the bigger robot. So there's a normal sized Herman who then gets into this bigger one to like control it, and it's like, oh yeah, there's all kinds of different shapes. We just kind of like control different size version of ourselves. So at the end of the film, you think Herman's dead, and Chris Pratt's like breaking down. If it's such like a sentimental thing, and he's kind of Chris Pratt's character, this kind of like redneck adjacent, I guess you could say. Like kind of that masculine stereotype of like, I don't have emotions or whatever. And he's breaking down like, you were my best friend, all this stuff. And then really tiny Herman comes out of the normal sized Herman that was driving the whole time. That was great.
I was so waiting, pretty much from the time that he said, yeah, there's different size Hermans for different jobs. I was like, oh, there is a tiny Herman somewhere in there.
Oh yeah.
And I was waiting, so looking forward to that. When it happened, I was so excited. It's like, yes,
I knew it was happening, but it was still so funny. Like I was like, it was great. Oh man. But yeah, the whole movie had a lot of really good, like, the kind of humor I think you would think it come to expect from someone who directed Avenger movies. I feel like, I don't know. I don't want to delay. Rate and review. If you were rating this film, The Electric State, where would you put this at? 0 to 10.
Yeah, well, I think I said before, I'd say it's a solid 3-star movie, so that probably puts it in the like 6 or 7 out of 10 territory for me. It's got a lot of interesting visuals. Like we said, it brings up a lot of things. It has a lot on its mind, even if it maybe hasn't thought through it all. I still find that more interesting than a movie that has nothing on its mind, but has thought through it all, deeply. That nothing.
Yeah. I like that I'd like that it went there to ask the questions. Again, I wish it would have dwelled on things longer, but the visuals were great. The humor was great. Pacing, I thought the pacing of the film was really good too. Yeah, I'm giving it a 7. 7 feels right. Not one of the best films by any means, but you guys know for me, 5 is average because 0 to 10, I'm thinking of it as like comparing it to other films. So 0 would be the worst film of all time, and 10 would be like the best.
Hmm.
It's certainly not the best, but I think it's better than average. I'm okay giving it a solid 7. But so going from there, I wanted to, before we get to some of the big themes, if you had to pick a favorite character, a favorite scene, and just a favorite visual in this, what it would be. And I feel like I spoiled some of mine because I forgot that I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I mean, we've already enthused a lot about Herman, who is definitely in the running for my favorite character from the film. Um, there's a lot of interesting visuals. One, I wouldn't say that all the robots necessarily make sense, in that I'm not sure why you built humanoid robots to do at all these different scales, to do all these different tasks, or it's not even clear what all the tasks are. But nevertheless, the designs of these robots are quite striking. They, most of them are generally, humanoid in the sense of having, a fairly recognizable head and two arms and two legs. But the variety that they explore in that, for like there's the baseball pitching machine. He's he's so it's very visibly a pitching machine, but also somehow humanoid. And so there's just a lot of fun in the visual invention of what are the different things they came up with, and also the visual of just the various different scales. So we talked about Herman. There we see, I think, 4 different size Hermans. One that's more or less, that like 5 foot or so humanish size. There's the one that we see on the screen there, who's like maybe 10 feet tall. There's like a 50-foot tall one, and and then the very tiny one. And there are other robots that we meet along the way that also kind of span those scales. And so I really enjoyed that visual. So kind of in the third act, in that big robot mayhem section, just all the visuals where you're seeing those different scales, robots acting in all those different scales, and how they were integrated together. And it just kind of reminds you that a lot of the world is built for people who are or beings who are 5'8", 5'10", 6'2", like kind of in that range. And it doesn't, not everything has to be that way. That is all very much human centric. And what are the implications of that, and what would it be like if we went outside that? Because even there are even actual human beings, forget fictional robots, there are actual human beings for whom things are not quite the right scale. And so that shapes their experience of the world. And so kind of, I think, pushing that even further to realize, oh yeah, there could be things that were 20 foot tall. What would that be like? And how would they interact with things that were 2 feet tall? I think it's just, even though it's really just kind of a visual gag or visual, and some visual invention, it touches on some interesting things to think about.
Yeah, for sure. For myself, I will say Herman was my favorite character. I like Herman a lot. Favorite scene, I'm actually going to go. Who was the bounty hunter? Is that Marshall Bradbury?
Giancarlo Esposito?
Yeah, him. There's a scene near the end. Basically, he realizes, he's hunting robots. He thinks robots are all bad, all evil, whatever. I don't think he ever quite changes his mind on that. But he does see that the people he was working for, he sees that they're not completely on the up and up. They're not all good. And near the end, there's in the scene where there's this, like the giant fight scene that has to happen because giant fight scene, robot movie, And so he's playing one of what are those called? The droids? They got the VR on thing.
Yeah, I forget what exactly they called them, but yeah, the drones.
It's like
that
mechs.
they can pilot.
Yeah, drone. Drone sounds right. So he's one of them, and basically after seeing what's happening on this during that fight, and also realizing that the people he's fighting for aren't all good, he has a moment of realizing he's not on the right side, even if he doesn't come to the terms of maybe robots are people too, and he takes his thing off. I thought that was cool. I appreciated how they did that as far as the scene. As far as visual, early on in the movie, the robot who turns out to be our main protagonist's brother, she's going up to a room and a robot's kind of like comes in and she's like, Because the only thing she knows of robots are they're bad. They killed the humans. That's kind of the stereotype that all humans have about robots. So they kind of like the way they do the visuals there were like at first you're like, oh no, this is a creepy robot, and then you realize, oh, that's just her brother. The visuals go from like, oh, creepy, kind of anxious to immediately, oh, this is a kind of fun little robot.
Hmm.
But they don't actually change the robot, but somehow they're able to use the visuals where you can kind of tell what's happening. So I
Hmm.
like how they, I guess that's probably something someone who understands cinematography could comment better on. I just thought it was cool. But yeah, so those would probably be the three that I picked. So as far as the big scene, the big themes, you were kind of already getting at one there. Just how things are built for certain kinds of people, certain things, and we don't accommodate. Whether it be robots or in real life, people of different heights, people of different abilities, all of that kind of thing. Did you want to talk any more into that appropriately, since you have the X-Man background too?
Um, yeah, I mean, obviously that is a big topic. What's there going to be a lot to say? I'm not sure if there's anything else in the movie that I would point to that commented on that further. There's obviously the aspect that, as I mentioned, the brother sort of seems to have a different ability than other people, and kind of exploiting that, and so that kind of gets into that territory of sometimes we treat people who are different as sort of magical or other, and so forth, and the difficulties that or the problems that can come from that when we see them as just when you see somebody's other, then it becomes easier to see them as something to exploit. And we'll probably get into that further. I think is one of your other themes. Um, but yeah, I think the other thing that often comes to mind when I think about this kind of like accommodating different abilities, different scales, is how much when you accommodate things that seem like they're accommodations for certain kinds of disabilities, certain kinds of people, actually tend to wind up making things just better and easier for everybody, and that it actually just makes a lot of sense. Um, it's interesting. I read somewhere, and I don't. I wish I could remember the reference, but it was pointing out how that actually a lot of the things that wind up getting sold as those like as seen on TV kind of things that are a little bit sort of maybe seem like niche products, but have useful utility for lots of people. Often started out as somebody had an idea for like a disability accommodation, and that it turns out that actually no, these things would be easier for everybody to use, or that lots of people could benefit from these things. And so I think that's a useful perspective. I'm not sure again how much that the movie has that on its mind, but I think it is kind of bringing, like I said, it's bringing up those questions of, hey, yeah, not everything is made to be as convenient for everyone as it could be.
Yeah, yeah. I yeah, I like that. And what's interesting that kind of that builds off of that too is it's not just acclimating or trying to make stuff where it's easier for everybody. The flip side of that is they don't just not make things easier. They're straight up like using people, using robots, taking advantage of. So you kind of mentioned how they used the brother, and because he had such a high intellect, they were able to use him. What was really interesting is so the film goes from like they're treating robots, giving them all the tasks that we don't want. So we're basically treating these robots. I'm trying to think of the word. You used the word. They're taking advantage of them in a way that's
Exploiting them.
yes, thank you. They're exploiting them to do stuff they don't want to do. And when the robots fight back and it becomes a whole war, because, the robots kind of basically form a union almost kind of deal, their response isn't, oh, hey, let's stop the fight. We can accommodate you. Their response is, oh, well, now we'll exploit this human who happens to be really smart, and we can use that technology to defeat the robots who are fighting because we exploited them.
Yeah,
So
I guess
rather,
I didn't clarify that yeah, the way that the war turns is because the robots are basically winning the war, and the way that the tide turns in favor of the humans, so that the robots can be kind of corralled into this one area, is the development of this VR drone technology, and the first application of that is to send these drone fighters in to fight the robots, because basically humans were too human fleshy bodies were too fragile to fight against metal robots, and so we needed these drones to be able to fight against the robots. And you don't realize until later on that all of that hinged on exploiting this little kid.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it gets to a lot of stuff that happened in the real world too. Like we often, you know, exploit different people because they're different than us, or segregate people that we think are dangerous. You know, I think you mentioned it in the movie. The robots are just all completely segregated together so that humans aren't like near them, and it's because they're afraid of them. And the whole reason they're afraid in the first place is because you were exploiting them. And it's like all of this could have just been handled better, right? Like what if we just said, "Oh, hey, you're right. Let's accommodate the robots. Let's not make them do all the tasks we don't want to do." But instead, we get afraid and then just exploit somebody else and just make the problem kind of perpetually worse. I think very similar things happen in the political arena and real world, where like we've definitely seen where people have been exploited, and then rather than trying to accommodate and help the people we exploited in those people groups, we have a tendency to make laws at such where they are unable to get out of the situation they're in, or that we're able to distance ourselves from them, or we exploit somebody else to do what they were doing. Because it's like, yeah, you know, right now we're exploiting the immigrants who are here illegally to do the work that we don't want to do. But then at the same time, we're trying to blame them for all of our problems. And then what happens when they leave? We're probably just going to find somebody else to exploit, do the work we don't want to do. I doubt that all of a sudden, you know, all of our white straight Americans are going to like, oh, well, now we want to do the field work and all these tasks that we were given. You know, like that's probably not what's going to happen. And I think the movie kind of dances around that a little bit, but I don't know if it really says it as straightforward as I would like it to.
Yeah, certainly there isn't a clear sense of, well, what are all of these jobs that the robots were doing that that they were built for? And you know, and if I had one criticism that I might have is that while the robot designs are very visually inventive, they they do the sort of cartoonishness of them, the variety of them does make it harder to tell like what actually was going on here in this pre-war world. You know, the leader of the robots is a straight up Mr. Peanut robot, right? So he seems to be some kind of advertising marketing
Yeah.
robot, and it's like I'm not really sure what the point of that is because we already have people like putting a person in a suit to advertise a thing is an easy thing to do, but we're already not doing that for Mr. Peanut. Like that's not a thing that I'm aware of is happening, and it's not a job that I hear people really crying out to be done by a robot instead of a person.
Yeah. Well, and that's an aspect I feel like they didn't actually address that I'm kind of interested in too. Like it seems like maybe some of these robots were just created specifically for one thing that we were like, wouldn't it be fun if we just had a real life Mr. Peanut?
Yeah,
And
and
then it's
maybe that is the point was that that people were just kind of making things that they weren't even doing real jobs. They were just sort of we created sentient beings for amusement without or sapient beings just for the sake of amusement and not really considering what they'd want after we were bored 5 minutes later. And maybe that's kind of
yeah.
more where they're going with this is that they didn't take our jobs or we didn't give them menial jobs so much as we made a bunch of stuff and then we got bored.
Yeah. Well, and then and then even like they don't go here in the movie, but I'm interested. Like, what if even if we did handle this situation well afterwards, when they were like, "Hey, we don't want to do this anymore," we were like, "Okay, what do you do if you're a Mr. Peanut robot? Like, other than specifically be Mr. Peanut, like, what else is there for him to do? You know?"
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
But maybe he went to school and became Dr. Peanut.
yeah. Who knows? But and that's so you get at like how we treat other people's or how we treat things that are different than us, but the film also is getting at like what is the difference between a robot and a human. So you get a lot of that through the story of her brother, where his consciousness is now in this robot, and at the end of the film he kind of comes back as the robot, and you're like, is he his consciousness, is he his body, is he his memories? So you kind of have like that ontological aspect as well. And even without that, without the personhood bit, we still have where like how are we treating Mr. Peanut? Are we treating him well? I don't know. Do you have anything to say on this as far as like personhood, how we treat technology, any of that?
Yeah, so there one of the more straightforward things to say is, there is some research that suggests that even though we know that like the automated checkout at the grocery store, for example, right? When at least when I go to the grocery store and if I want to do like self checkout or scan as I go or something like that, at the cash register there isn't a person, but there is still a recorded voice that says things like, thank you for shopping here today, and don't forget to take your receipt and all that kind of stuff. And there's some research to suggest that there is value in being polite to those things, even though we know that there is no person there. Like I'm not at all confused about whether the cash register is sentient or not, right? Because yet, while it sounds human, I know that is literally a human voice that recorded, and it's probably only like 12 or 15 things that it says, right? It was 10 minutes worth of work to record those little clips. But treating those, not getting mad at it, not yelling at it, not whatever, like it's actually a value because it helps us to be better people to when we are actually interacting with people. That when we are rude or obnoxious or dismissive to our Alexas and our cash registers and so forth, that's just kind of training us to be that way to actual human servers at restaurants or the actual cashiers at stores or things like that. So I do think that even if the technology itself doesn't care, doesn't have any feelings, isn't hurt by how we treat it, that there is still value in treating it well. And then you get into issues of while I don't think we have gotten there yet, we obviously have the ability to at least imagine that we might have a robot or a computer program or something that had enough features that um, would make it sapient in the same way that we are, and it probably behooves us to start acting that way even before we get to that point, so that we are in a good place to treat them well when we are, rather than having to figure out like we
Hmm.
don't want the first sapient or robot or AI or whatever to be the one that has to tell us like, hey, could you maybe not be awful to me all the time? Like that would be super awesome, thanks. But instead, like, we're actually we've already kind
Yeah.
of figured out how do we treat these things well, so that we aren't creating yet another oppressed or exploited or marginalized population.
Yeah. 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 I I like all that. I also from what I seen, and you would probably know the studies better than me, but the how we treat well, and I could say this about people for sure. I think it's probably the same as technology. How we treat other things doesn't just impact the thing; like it also impacts you. I think Invincible is doing a really good job of that in the current season of showing you how like, murdering something didn't just hey I hurt the person they killed, but like it actually impacted the hero that did the killing. Like something about causing pain to something else impacts your spirit, your mind, whatever. And I think that's going to be something we have to explore more as we continue to go down this road of AI and robots in real life. And we might get to a point where we can create robots that feel pain. I'm not sure that we should, because why would we want that? I'm unsure. And if we do, causing it pain isn't just going to be, oh, hey, I caused something pain. It's still going to do something to you. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that it is damaging to the soul to treat other people poorly, and there are right. We don't want to make everything just about ourselves, and like
Yeah.
the well, I'm going to be nice to you only because it's better for me. Right? That's a
Yeah.
little bit self-serving, but at the same time, I think it is worth recognizing and acknowledging that there are costs to ourselves to do these things. And that's something that I like. I'm not the hugest Harry Potter person, But I do think the concept of the Horcruxes is a really powerful notion, right? That by engaging in these very violent and horrendous acts, right? That it's costing him part of his soul, right? It it makes him somehow less human, um,
Hmm.
to go through with that, and which is why so few people are willing to go to those lengths. And I think if we can somehow kind of picture the same things happening to in our own sense, right? Imagine that we are creating Horcruxes or some smaller scale version thereof, with all these various large and small acts of cruelty and unkindness, and things that I myself have done, right? I'm not just trying to point the
Yeah.
finger at other people, right? I am certainly guilty of being impatient at times with people whose job it is to provide me with service in some fashion, um, or just being dismissive or not interacting with them as fellow human beings, right? I am capable of those things too, and I don't like it. I don't like what that says about me and what kind of person that helps me to become. But it does happen, and I would prefer not to do that, both for the sake of other people and for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's also like a societal aspect to it. So it's not just, the person you're hurting or you're hurting yourself by treating something better or worse. But like in this kind of world, robots seem to be part or were part of their regular society. And, just like if we're all, I see this as someone who works in a restaurant. If you're all in a restaurant together and there's one person who's treating the cashier really, really poorly, that doesn't just impact the person who treated the cashier poorly. And it doesn't just impact the cashier, but everybody else in line's impacted by that. Everybody who's working in the restaurant, all of a sudden their mood's changed now. The whole dynamic of everyone's relationship in that restaurant has changed because one person treated somebody else poorly. I think if you replace the cashier with a robot, even if the robot didn't feel anything, it still impacts the person who said the mean things to the cashier, and it still impacts the mood of everyone in the restaurant, front
Mm-hmm.
and back. And yeah, I think that how we treat technology is probably important for a number of reasons. We could probably go on for a really long time about why, but it just does seem like it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing I think I want to touch on before we start wrapping this up, so we don't go over too much. In this show, they kind of show different sides where various sides of different aspects they're mongering power, right? First, it's the robots are fighting against the humans because the humans were taking advantage of them. Then the humans started saying, okay, so we need more power, so we're going to develop this whole new technology so that we have all the power. And one man was in charge of that whole project, and we all kind of just let him do it and have all this power because it's justified. We're going to beat the robots because the robots are killing people, and that makes sense, right? And then the robots do kind of the same thing later in the movie where they're like, well, we need all the power so we can defeat the humans who segregated us. And then it's like everybody's finding reasons to justify this power mongering. Is there ever a really good reason to justify power mongering, or is it always going to come back to bite you, Andy?
I you know it may be naive, it may be the easy answer, but I feel like that you know that is always the wrong way to go. That concentrating power, there's always a reason to justify it, right? There's always some way that you can rationalize. That's one of our I would say that's one of the great human superpowers, is that we can rationalize just about anything. And so I think there's a reason why we have warnings about the ends not justifying the means. And I think this is a great place. This is a great example of, or a great place to apply that. That just because you think that you can wield it better doesn't necessarily mean that makes it okay. It's still problematic in and of itself, right? There's a reason why we say absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right? There's just not a good way to be able to exert that much influence over such a large number of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. I've actually, because of different people I know and arguments I have online, like all mature adults these days, I've got into this debate a lot around Christian nationalism specifically, where someone will throw out this whole question of like, okay, but if what we're saying, basically, a lot of the argument from the other side of people who support this whole Christian nationalist idea, their thinking is, if Christians are in power, they're going to, support love. They're going to support, loving our neighbor and God's ways. And wouldn't that make it a better nation? And in a way, in theory, I'm like, sure, that probably is true. That makes sense. I do think Christianity works really well. The problem, I think, is when you're striving after power, the power is the thing you want, not the Christianity bit, if that makes sense. Like if you're in power and you happen to be Christian, it could work. But Christian striving for power, that's fundamentally not Christian. you know, Christ is all about giving up power, turning the other cheek, putting others above yourself. So I think if what you're doing is going after the power, going after the position, you're making that your God. And that's no longer Christian to me. And that's where I will call stuff like Christian nationalism a heresy, because it's not Christianity if what you're striving for is power. Now, if what you're saying is simply, it would be good if people in power were Christians, sure, I'm there with you on that. That's fine. But if what you're saying is Christians should try to get power, that's fundamentally unchristian, from what I read in the Bible. So I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't work for me. I don't know. What do you think, Andy? Tell me that you think that I'm wrong for calling it a heresy and that I'm the heretic.
Oh, are we doing one of those
If you want.
side? And,
You can if you want, I guess.
no, yeah, no. I think that's maybe a better way to express it, right? Is because obviously there are positions of power. There are I do think that there is a function for government and for collective action and so forth. So it's not that it's not that I am advocating for complete anarchy and individualism and nobody should have any kind of authority. But these things need to flow right from consent and in limited ways and in limited scope and with balances and checks so that we're not concentrating power. We are distributing power in different ways at different times to accomplish different purposes. When we see that there are things that can only be accomplished by some sort of larger scale action or activity or institution. But yeah, I don't think it's terribly. I don't think that I can. I've seen an example of saying, well, if you just put me in charge, if I was just in charge of everybody, then I would be benevolent and everything would be fine. Because that path to getting to be in charge of everybody, you've undermined that goal along the way, and you have passed up many opportunities to be benevolent, to be kind, to be compassionate, to show love, in order to get to that point, that you no longer have the moral standing to be able to then say, oh, now I'm going to do the good things. And also, not to mention that just the human nature of, well, I didn't have to do it yet. Like maybe I'm not totally in control yet. But like tomorrow is when I'll start being the compassionate, benevolent ruler. But today I still need to use my power to get this group in line or that group in line or whatever. It just when is the time that you flip that switch? It's easy for that day to never come.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to put this all the way back to what you said when we were naming bad actors in politics in the intro. Because I think a good example here is, especially because I live in America, so it's easy for me to think of American politicians. If I look at some of the presidents in my own lifetime, I see where George W. Bush, like him, hate him, whatever, when he went for the presidency, if you look at like his speeches and stuff, it's not about like him wanting power. It's he has these ideas that he wants to see happen. Even in his second term, he really had a lot of stuff he wanted to do to help the immigrants. He had an idea to completely reform our system, and he actually wrote a book about that after his presidency, which is really interesting. But kind of an aside, and that's where I'm like, I can disagree with you, I can agree with you. Either way, I see what he's doing, and if whether or not I like it, I don't think it's fundamentally evil. Barack Obama, when he's running, he's having these speeches. He has stuff that he's wanting to do. He has policies that he cares about. He has, wanting to get universal health care because he cares about people. And if you look at his speeches, it's about getting these policies done rather than getting him in power. Donald Trump comes, though, look at his speeches. A lot of the times it's about getting him in power and giving you power if you vote for me. It's about the power. And that's where I'm like, that to me, that's why I would say Donald Trump is just an evil person. Because I think it's about the power. And that's where I'm like, that's not, to me, that is just not okay. And I think historically, when you look at stuff, there's been I can't think of any time where we see somebody who is like, I want the power, that it's turned out really well for people, like it usually doesn't.
Right. Are you viewing a position like that as a public service job? Right. Is your role to do something on behalf and for the benefit of other people and all the people, or do you see that job as to the benefit of yourself and the people like you, or the people that help you, or the people that you feel are on your team or what have you? But yeah, because again, I do think that there is a place for these kinds of system of government and some sort of executive leadership, or one or a small number of people that are quote unquote in charge, but are they occupying that role in order to carry out service to the wider public, or are they doing it for their own gain and benefit? Right. I mean, there's a reason why the Constitution fairly early on is pretty clear on you shouldn't be able to get financial gain out of being the president of the United States. That's a
Yeah.
conflict of interest, because if push comes to shove, are you going to choose the thing that is beneficial for the country, the things that makes you money? It's going to be real tough to say no to the thing that makes you more money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of the difference of having power and power mongering. Like I think you're trying to get some things done, and people give you power so that you can have that done. You have power in that instance. But I think there's also a place where people are just trying to get power. And like, if I have enough power, I can get all this stuff that I want, and I could do it for you too. Maybe it's a little bit of chicken and the egg, but to me, it's a lot more of like, is your intention to get power, then you're going to do the things, or is your intention, I'm already doing the thing, give me power so I can do it better? I don't know.
Right.
There's a difference in power mongering and having authority, I guess.
Yeah. To those who are faithful with little will be given much.
Good word. We like to end on Bible verses, and I'm just kidding. We don't usually, but I do think that's poignant and well said. Do you have anything else you wanted to add when it comes to politics, the electric state, Chris Pratt's haircut, anything like that?
Yeah, the one other thing that I wanted to touch on, I don't remember exactly where in the development of large language models and other AI, that have been making the headlines, where the script of this movie came along and so forth. But I did have a lot of problems with. Wait a minute. So this one kid is kind of is the center of all of this infrastructure. Like, it all depends on this one kid's brain. Like, that seems implausible. But if I think about it in terms of it's personalizing an allegory about all of the human creativity that has gone into making the written works, the visual works of art, the music, the video, all these things we now put into training these various models, and then we just use them to put out orders and orders of magnitude more things potentially, right? Because they can just endlessly churn out text or pictures or what have you. There is something there, I think, and whether that was actually on the minds of the filmmakers when they put these things together, or whether that was too early, I can't say for sure. But it was much more comfortable kind of with that aspect of the movie, thinking about it in terms of, yeah, actually that is kind of what we're doing. Yes, they boil it down to one person because it's easier to relate to one person than kind of a class of people, but that is kind of what we're doing, is we're taking the creative mental work of a relatively small number of people and then just amplifying that, but in a way that completely removes the the attribution to the people that did that creative work. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, again, it's not a theme that the movie has a ton of things to say about, but I think it is something else that it touches on, or it's hard not to reflect on in light of current events, even if that wasn't, like I said, even if that wasn't something the filmmakers were trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. I actually I didn't think about it from that perspective. That's interesting. I also had thought of it almost symbolically, where in this film, a lot of we're treating a lot of robots as if they're less than human, and you see a lot where the robots are very human in the film. So
Mm-hmm.
I also thought that maybe they were trying to show a human as being very robot because they're basically just using his brain as a computer. So I was like, maybe they were kind of doing something like that too. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, I
it's
suspect
interesting.
there's something to that there. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff I think you could pull at that they kind of like that was like there, but they didn't go into it enough that if it was intentional that it was there, or if it was just there because there's robots in movies and people who think like us will find it whether it's there or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I had a lot of fun with this movie. I had a lot of fun with this. If you're good, I think I'm gonna go ahead and jump to the wrap up.
Let's do it.
All right. So with that, we started. We identified it bad actor in politic or policies, I guess. We like to end these kind of episodes, or primarily political episodes, by identifying a positive political actor, someone that we think who was beneficial in a political way from either real life, the Bible, or fiction. Wherever you want, really. I wanted to go Bible here in a maybe kind of a weird way. James, who I believe is the brother of Jesus, literally in the New Testament. One of the things you see when you read through some of the I say works of history, some of the documents that we actually do have from that time, is actually really interesting how James was doing so much to help the people in Jerusalem, the marginalized, the poor, all this stuff. He was organizing the church, which an polity, to help those around him in such a way that there was a lot of thought given to part of what might have caused the Jews to revolt in Jerusalem was when Rome killed James, because he was known as James the Benevolent, and he did so much good for the community that was just felt so deeply. I'm not out James for being a good political actor within the church, the early church there in Jerusalem. I think he's incredible, and more people should study what he did. What about you, Andy?
Sure. Well, I mean, you brought up George W. Bush, and in the interest of like making it clear that this is not just about Republican bashing or anything like that. I mean, let's
Yeah.
remember that George W. Bush was a big part of where the PEPFAR program that has been providing HIV medicine to people in primarily Africa. It might be other places as well.
Yeah.
Right? That the program that I was talking about earlier that we've cut off funding to or pausing and rethinking. That was something that came from a conservative administration, and something that policy. Obviously, since I didn't agree with getting rid of it, I thought it was worthwhile to do in the first place. And I also appreciate to highlight another Republican, appreciated a lot of things that John McCain did, including the time that he came back just to stand up and cast a vote for what he thought was right, and not necessarily what his party wanted in not getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. Right. And again, if there was a better alternative to the Affordable Care Act, I recognize the Affordable Care Act is not perfect. There are things that we could have done better. There are things that we could have improved on there. But just getting rid of things with the promise of maybe we'll replace it in the future, and not having a plan to swap it out, right? That causes more harm than good, at least in the short term. And so, I appreciated his willingness to say, what, no, if we're going to do this, we need to do it correctly and not just quickly. And so yeah, those are and I'm mixing kind of because I am naming names here, but
Yeah.
those are also specific actions and policy decisions that I thought were worth highlighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, this isn't strictly a politics podcast, but in theme, I just think everybody should take the time, if you want a little bit of amusement and to see what people like me mean when we're like, a lot of this is just tribalism for tribalism's sake, compare Romney's Romney Care in Utah to Obama's Obamacare federally. It's almost the exact same plan. It'll blow your mind. And with that, guys, we're going to go ahead and finish this up here. If you would, we would really appreciate if you guys could rate and review our show on Podchaser or on Good Pods or Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You know, one of those, the Podchaser, Good Pods, that helps like search engines like Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It helps other people looking for podcasts in those apps. So all of those are a big help to us. Cost you nothing but time, and we would really appreciate it. Also want to shout out again, Jeannie Mattingly. Thank you so much. You make our show possible through your donation. If you guys want your own shout out, again, Apple Podcasts, Patreon, or Captivate, you can get your own shout out on the show as well for as little as $3 a month. Check out the rest of our primarily political episodes down below with that link in the description. And remember, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests. Till next time.